Well, hey, it's good old Tuesday. Nice and bright and sunny out here in Amsterdam land. So today I thought I would go over this thing in the Kubernetes world called Backstage, which I've yet to like fully comprehend and figure out what it is. No, I think as I recall, somewhere in over here in Tanzu land, in the Tanzu application platform, which is basically our toolkit for getting Kubernetes ready for developers to use, making it easier for them to use and operator stuff. It's basically making Kubernetes better for developers and running custom software. I'm repeating myself, but then also all the enterprise governance stuff out there, just the dev stack that we have. So we're using it in there for the UI or something. And like I've actually watched one of the presentations I want to go over for Backstage before 1.5 times, but I thought I would spend some more close attention. But first, if you're the kind of person who watches these videos and is interested, there's a presentation. They call them webinars, but we put together a presentation, a webinar that's coming up next week. I have spent a lot of time kind of massaging the content for it. I'm actually just moderating some questions. But it's January 19th, and I'll put a link to it right here. It's going to be it's pretty good, because I think what we have orchestrated here is we have, I'll put a link to it here if you want to click on it. And of course, if you're watching the archive, you can click down below to look at it. But it's free. You should register for it. And what we're going to go over is some people from Forrester. We've done this in like French and Italian as well, but the English one's coming up. Let me show you. This is my favorite slide, which I'll get to, but you can kind of get a sense of the presentation we'll be doing. First, Forrester is going to go over, I think they have a really great definition of platform and what a platform is. And basically a platform means you're building something on top of a container orchestrator that allows developers to rapidly deploy their stuff and focus on coding. I mean, a platform as a service, though no one calls it that anymore, which is fine. That's just fallen out of style. It's not a funicular or whatever. So there's, as you can see, there's some great overview from Forrester on that. And then they're also going to go over, they did a study about kind of like the, looking at the Tanzu application service, the Cloud Foundry thing that we have, kind of the ROI on it, just showing that it's effective, that it delivers on what it promises, that it's good. But in that section, what I was kind of talking with them about delivering is not only talking about how awesome we are and our products are and how awesome the customers are, all that kind of stuff, but also how you kind of can use that as a way to think about putting together your own business case for getting a platform in place. And then there'll be some discussion with I'll ask some questions of my coworkers and the Forrester people. But just to give you an idea, so this is I'm always looking for this picture, right? Like, what does a stack look like? And I never really know the usage rights, but it would be nice after we do this webinar if I could start to use this one. I should probably just get permission from them to use it. But you can see there's going to be a nice overview in 3 parts. Kind of what is a platform, why do you need it, what are things to think about when you're going through it, how do you think through like ROI and the business case of doing a platform, what are some things you can learn from the studies that they did. They basically, I forget how many, I think it's less than 10, but they studied several enterprise customers that used the Tanzu application service, the Cloud Foundry based paths we have, and kind of the results that they got from it. But you should tune into that. And again, if you look at the link in the chat, you can register for free, or you just look down below in the archive here. You'll see a link to it, and you should attend it. It's of course it's Europe friendly, so it might be a little late, but even if you can't register for it, you can get the archive. So let's jump into the next thing I wanted to go over, which is looking at what Backstage is now. This is, if you go to backstage.io, you can see, essentially, let's see if there's a good visual from this presentation. Got that. I don't know. Is that anything? Sort of. But essentially, this is part of what I want to figure out. But like, it's from the Spotify folks. And I think they had been working on this for a couple of years, then open sourced it. And it's basically like, here's what I think it is. I think it is a way, whenever you're working developers inside an organization, you basically need documentation of two types. One of like all the services and the components, the stuff that you have, so you can look it up and know about it. And traditionally, that's been done with like a wiki or in Confluence or something, where you just are kind of manually documenting things. And then you need a place to kind of list out all of the other services that you might use, right? Like, so like, we'll use my favorite banking sort of examples. I guess if you're at a life insurance company and you're in charge of the service that signs people up to use, you know, they use to apply for life insurance, you might be interested in, you want to get a quick quote from them. You know, gather their demographic data and then get a quote that'll kind of estimate what their insurance would be before you finalize it or finalize it. So there's probably another service that you, the people doing the buy insurance form, that team, they're probably going to call a service internally that's like, given this demographic data, how much is their policy going to cost? So you need some way of knowing what that service is and how to use it. And then the third thing, and this third thing isn't really, I think this might be a large part of what makes one, you know, the main usage of Backstage different, is this hasn't been done very much traditionally, is you want to have a view into all of the everything that's running, especially your own stuff as a developer, just to kind of know what it is, kind of see how it's doing, but also, you know, if you need to troubleshoot things or you kind of want to track down what's happening. Now in operations, whatever you want to call that team nowadays, they might have a view of what's going on there. We used to call this a CMDB, a configuration management database, which would just show you, it's supposed to show you the current state of IT so you can start to diagnose it. And you got all sorts of dashboards and tools, and I don't know. We could have all sorts of discussions about that. But I think part of what Backstage wants to do is display that as well and kind of pull that in and essentially have it be, what are all the UIs and dashboards that a developer needs to look at? And analogously, what I'm thinking in my head is like, so if I've got a mono cloud instead of a multi-cloud, if I'm just using like AWS or Azure, or I'm using the Tanzu application service, our Cloud Foundry thing, or whatever, there are UIs that you go to look at all of these things. And so you could go log into their UIs and see them. But I think what Backstage is trying to do is to say, not only the cloud services that we're using, but let's also pull up those pages and kind of be able to create those UIs to look at our own stuff and even customize things so that we only look at this. So, I mean, back in my day, we would call that a portal, which is a fun word. I don't know what the kids call it nowadays, but you have a portal system. And, you know, if you're in the Java world, there'd be a bunch of portlets and you can customize what's in there. And, you know, if you're running a Java app server, I think you could add portlets to kind of say, like, when I log into WebSphere or JBoss or whatever, I can go see all these pages. Now, there's a fourth thing that I think Backstage does, or a fourth bucket of things that I think makes it interesting. And by interesting, what I mean is like, why do we need this thing? Aren't we just reinventing the same thing over again? Now, there's two reasons why you reinvent the same thing over again. Well, I should say three. One is like the old way just like doesn't work in the context anymore, right? So while you might have Java application services that could do a lot of this stuff, servers, it just doesn't work with this stack, right? Like it's incompatible. And it would be too much work to go in and update the way that app servers and their portals do this stuff. That's an absurd example. But, you know, you just rewrite things because, like, it's not worth it to go redo the old thing because it's a completely different way of programming. And the second thing might be, like, you just don't like it. And that might be, if you remember the lock-in conversation from last episode, you know, you may not want to pay money for whatever it is. It may not have the features that you need. Or, like many developers, you just want to write your own stuff, the old not invented here thing. And then the third thing, I mean, I think to especially like underscore, I think what's going on here is that you just need a new tool beyond your taste and like what may be existing already. Like just what you want doesn't exist already. So you need to write that. And I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. And then finally, before I get started, the other blind spot or thing I don't really have is I don't really know what alternatives or competitors are to compare here for what a Backstage does. And I'm also a little underinformed about how we use it in Tanzu land. Like I said, I think we're just using it for the UI stuff. Maybe let me look that up. Tanzu Backstage. I think we have it in. Yeah, here we go. Oh yeah, I remember watching this. I should probably watch this too. But essentially, we're using it to build the. Let me put a link to this here to build the GUI there. And we actually do have. There's some other videos we have somewhere, but let me put. I'll put this in the show notes as well, if you want to see the Tanzu Tuesday going over that. Maybe I should watch that. But let me put this here. I should also say that back in May or March, one of the M months, Joe, over on his TGIK thing, he had a 2-hour episode kind of looking through Backstage and trying to learn it too. And I have to admit, I didn't get past the part where he was installing Node and giving some commentary on Node or something. But it might be interesting to go and watch the rest of that at some point. But let's do a little bit of a cursory thing here. Now, I want to watch that video, but first, let's watch some of the demo videos because they're short. And, you know, I'll do the usual watch party, or as I used to call it in the 2000s, moderated screencast, except I don't have someone here to badger. But let's just watch these, and I'll take some notes along the way that y'all can read along to. If you really want. Let's see. Watch notes. Here we go. Okay, so first video. Let's go to the actual YouTube page.
So, hello everyone. Nice of you to join us. I'm happy to see that so many people joined us and are probably have an interest in Backstage. Let me first introduce myself. I am Stefan. I'm the product manager for Backstage. I've been working in Spotify for a little over 3 years on Backstage from the start, almost.
Whoa, this is a long one. 43 minutes.
Developer experience things.
It's from 2021.
To make our engineers' lives better and more productive, essentially. So today we're going to do a kind of a webinar series. I'm going to share some.
Let's see, where's the playback
short, brief
speed?
background about Backstage and what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to do a demo, maybe 15-minute demo or something like that, of our internal deployment. For those of you who have checked out our open source version of Backstage, it's somewhat hard to see exactly what it could be. So hopefully the demo will give you some inspiration of, and also see what's ahead, what will come in the later stages of Backstage open source. So first of all, what is Backstage?
We'll
so
skip
Backstage
past the front matter.
This is a new logo as well that you've seen, hopefully. So Backstage is our homegrown developer portal. It's essentially an app store or one front end for all your developer tools. Spotify used to have a huge problem of all our tools and systems and all the documentation, etc., being just spread out all across hundreds of systems, actually. This was actually starting to slow Spotify down. By looking at how long it took for our engineers to get productive, that's one way of looking at productivity. We saw that as we were growing as a company and we were adding more and more infrastructure tools and more complexity into our software systems, we were starting to slow down. And this meant that pretty much as we grew, every additional engineer got less productive. So
let's see, an app store for all your developers supercharges and creates a new and better standard. Okay, so this is a good point. An app store for all your developer tools. So it's like a internal marketplace, whatever. But I think the other thing again, as you are starting to see here, is there's some runtime elements that I think are more interesting. So let's keep going.
It's not a good situation to be in if you're a company like Spotify who's growing quickly and have ambitious plans. So after going around and talking to a lot of our customers in the different teams at Spotify, one thing that we were hearing clearly was that they were slowing down because of a lot of the complexity or the context switching jumping between different tools and not finding the right information to get the job done. So that's where we decided to create a single platform experience for all of our developer tools and infrastructure. So rather than having different infrastructure teams building separate tools, what we decided to do was to build, my team would take on to build a platform. And in that platform, we would integrate all the different tools that we had as what we call plugins. So instead of building a separate product, we build a plugin into Backstage. And what comes out on the other side is a more consistent experience for our engineers. So right now we have over 60 different teams that have contributed at least one plugin to Backstage. And we have, I think.
All right. So here's another point. So I'll call it, what our phrase is, platform operations or platform as a product. So you have what probably nowadays people call, it's a little vague, what people call a DevOps team or a SRE team. Basically, the team that builds the infrastructure and all the services that an organization runs that developers use to run their applications. And again, this is like a platform, like I was mentioning in the webinar. You can go see it's what the team that runs whatever your platform as a service that you never call a platform as a service. You can't use that phrase anymore. No one says that. I don't know why, but they don't like it. But you don't use that phrase. And so, you know, if you're like, whether you're building up Kubernetes or a Cloud Foundry based thing like the Tanzu application service, you install that platform and you also put a bunch of middleware things on top of it, you know, databases that you have, services for monitoring, testing, your build pipeline. So you actually have this platform. I used to call it an accidental platform if you don't curate and think about it. And so essentially, instead of that being not only the documentation and discoverability and knowing about those things spread out over whatever, I guess the goal they're shooting for here is let's have one UI, one app. The App Store is only part of it, but one place that people go to find out and use, and then, as I think we'll see, kind of monitor the usage of this stuff. And we do that by making it adding plugins, or as we used to say, portlets or whatever that plug into there. And then when your developers use stuff, all the developers in your organization go to this one place. But also critically, whoever is building that infrastructure or those services, they also go to this one place. And there's one standard way of representing what the stuff is and how to use it. I still am curious about the runtime part, but let's jump back in.
Over 120 different plugins built by those 60 teams. So Backstage internally it's kind of a huge project. And what we were seeing when we went out and demonstrating at Backstage and talking to other infrastructure organizations was that they were seeing similar problems. So they were also seeing fragmentation and all the complexity of integrating open source software. So when we demoed Backstage, people were pretty amazed, to be honest, that oh shit, this is a nicer way to do this. And then we started thinking about maybe this is not a Spotify specific problem, and is there a way for us to open source what we have so that we can start to create a better developer experience, not only for Spotify engineers, but for the broader sort of engineering landscape. And this is what we're trying to achieve with Backstage. We think that there's a missing open source project that ties together various other open source and infrastructure products together in a more consistent experience. So this is what we're hoping to do with Backstage. Enough about that. Let's dive into the demo. So before we go doing that, the typical user of Backstage today inside Spotify is a team that is working on a piece of the Spotify puzzle. It's a piece of the Spotify app or the Spotify service. So it could be teams like search team that owns search across all of Spotify. Another team could be owning our ad insertion stack, or the Spotify for Kids, a part of that experience. All of different Spotify divided up into small teams, and all of those teams use Backstage as their primary way to create and manage the software that they own, that build up, that make up their parts of Spotify. So this is the starting point. This is the homepage of Backstage. There's a lot of different things going on here, but Spotify engineers use Backstage very differently. So the homepage is where you have.
All right. It's always good. Pause a video like this and kind of just look over what's going on. So this is, I guess, like he said. So what do we have? It's got a. See, this is the other thing that I'm trying to get a handle on is how is this different than Atlassian stuff? I mean, I would assume the Atlassian people are freaking out about what's going on here because it kind of is. Yeah, there we go. Okay, see, so discoverability of things. I mean, this is kind of what I've been repeating as my theory of what happens. Then you actually can see the runtime environments, how, as it's very straightforward, and then just kind of documentation for stuff, right? So. Maybe you could also say, aside from IDEs, like the IDEs that developers use, this might be the primary UI that they look at for all the stuff that they need. So let's, and then there's also, whenever you got someone's eyeballs, you can start to throw all sorts of other stuff in there. It's, because intranets typically are awful at companies. So everyone in an organization ends up re-implementing their own intranet. But I guess that's a rant for another time.
You can customize some of your the entry points, if you will. You can put your favorites in here and reason to visit it. There's some use information, and there's some links to deeper parts of Backstage where you have your machine learning segments and tech health, etc. We even have for those of you who are Spotify customers, you maybe have seen playlists called Daily Mix that are generated for you. This is a sort of gaming of that. You get a daily mix of your playlist for technical documentation.
I just unliked that here because I see that I'm logged in as the Let's see where we are as the Tanzu people. We're at 1718. Let me log in as myself. And that way.
So hello everyone. Nice of you to join us. I'm happy to see that some people join us and are probably have an interest in Backstage. But a typical user journey for an engineer is that I want to go and I want to create software. That's typically a starting point for a lot of things. And the way we do that inside Spotify is we have standardized the process for doing that through Backstage. So regardless of what I want to create, it's a service, a data pipeline, a website, a mobile feature, it's all down to the same process. So we have these what we call templates that basically instantiate the project for you. So if I want to create a new backend service, for example, I follow one of those templates. And in this example, the template is marked as being golden path. This means that we in the platform organization at Spotify think you should follow this template or this path. If you do that, we will guarantee that you're supported fully. And if you jump,
I missed that because I was doing other stuff.
A new backend service, for example, I follow.
Let me rewind this.
So regardless of what I want to create, it's a service, a data pipeline, a website, a mobile feature. It's all down to the same process. So we have these what we call templates that basically instantiate the project for you. So if I want to create a new backend service, for example, I follow.
Okay, so see, this is another there's a lot going on in this project, but in the Tanzu application platform, we would call these accelerators. We should probably just start calling them templates because that's everyone understands that. And as our buddy here, what's his name? I'm terrible at people's names. Well, I don't know. A moisture farm. Anyways. Yeah, so this is I want to start a new project, and then this, we would call these accelerators in the Tanzu application platform, which are templates, but it's exactly that, a template that kind of gets you started, just like Spring Boot, right? Like a lot of the work that's gone on in Spring over the years, especially Spring Boot, I think is influencing a lot of this templating of projects that get started out, but it just handles going, it's so that you don't have a blank cursor, blank screen in front of you. It kind of starts you off, but it's also a good control point for security and architecture to kind of start enforcing. Enforcing is a sensitive word, but to start to put people on the right rails, to put up the guardrails of things they should follow, and the practices that you want to have, so that you don't have a bunch of people doing all of their own stuff.
Those templates, and in this example, the template is marked as being golden path. This means that we in the platform organization at Spotify think you should follow this template or this path. If you do that, we will guarantee that you're supported fully. And if you end up in problems, we got you back. So if I choose one of those templates, I have to log in with GHG. So that's another example. We use GitHub internally, and Spotify Backstage manages your interactions with some of your interactions with GitHub as well. So coming back to this, if I want to create one of those Apollo services, as we call them, if I follow this template or this wizard, I pretty much get a running backend service that runs in production and that has all the recommended practices built in. So I get CI hooked in up. I get documentation. We use a docs-like code approach where we have documentation close to the code. All that is set up for me. Logging, I get kubernetes deployment files. Everything is all set up for me. So the only thing I need to do is just to go to the GitHub repository, pull down the code, and start coding. All the infrastructure has been abstracted away and removed from I don't really have to do anything about it. Going back here again, so that was for a backend service. If I wanted to create a data pipeline or a mobile feature, a website, or even technical documentation, all of these things are done in the same way. And these templates are they are collaboratively sourced, if you will. So even if they are maintained typically by the infrastructure organization, they are also open to contributions. So if an engineer at Spotify thinks we should use technology X instead of technology Y, there's a chance for them, or at least they have it.
There you go. So that's great. It has templates so that you can kind of build up the conventions of things to do, which, something we try to do in large organizations always for decades. But each time we have centralized templates to kind of start off the best practices and the norms of doing something, I think we get a little bit better at it. And, hopefully that'll happen this time.
That's for sending a pull request to change this template and thus changing the recommended practices. Okay, so now that I've created a bunch of software that make up.
Now, another point to make is that any given organization, and I've seen many large organizations do this, can set this up on their own, right? So they could make these templates that you start with, and I'm sure there are many people who are in charge of builds and DevOps people or whatever who do this. But what starts to become important, I don't know if you would call it it's not a network effect, but if you do have a even mildly successful, open source is not the exact thing, but a community that's doing this, you start to, you don't have unique ways of doing it and of setting up these templates. It also tends to be easier to do and better documented, more extensible, because you have, these kind of classical open source effects. You've got a lot of people using it, so they kind of are product managing a lot of usability and better features into it. But then two, there's probably a lot of these templates that you can just get off of the web, right? Definitely that probably in the Tanzu world, we would have some to offer, as I mentioned. But you don't have to reinvent these things everywhere. And then 3, there's kind of like ongoing industry knowledge about these actual people's skills and knowledge about this stuff. They don't have to relearn it every time. Now, you again, if you look at the Spring Boot initializer, if you go to Josh Long's favorite place, start.spring.io, I think that might be his second favorite place, I forget. But you can kind of see that idea in the Java world going there, where you can add in templates to kind of start projects out. And you can imagine there's similar effects of the community here. If you have a standardized way of doing that, instead of every large organization coming up with their own way of templating, and it's not just per organization, there will be 10, 20 different ways per, depending on how many thousands of developers and people you have who've all templated out their own systems here. So it's nice to have a standard way of doing it.
All the pieces in my product that I develop at Spotify. And the second category of use cases that you go through with Backstage is to manage those software components. And what we have is a manage tab here. And what I get here is a lot of things, but if you start looking at the side here, you see that basically a squad is a team at Spotify. And so this is the team page. I get some overview of what the team owns and what they should care about from a Backstage perspective. So apparently we should care about our cloud costs. We should look at our security incidents, etc., and cycle time for our team. And this is where the strength of Backstage starts to come in, and the plugin architecture starts to show. So rather than
so here you have what would be called a dashboard, going over the metrics for the team, which is fine. Again, a large part of it is standardizing on everyone having the same thing, not only having the same visual, but having the same way of doing it. So you don't have to relearn this stuff. And hopefully that it means it's more updated. And I'm guessing you can create all sorts of plugins or whatever to automate this collection of stuff.
Like a specific security website or security system that you have to go through, or security needs to hunt down people to take care of their issues. What they do instead is that they build a plugin into Backstage. And that plugin makes so that engineers don't have to go around finding this information. It's all integrated into Backstage in one place. This overview page also shows me, ownership. Ownership is a super strong concept at Spotify. So the teams that have this software, created the software, also owns the software, the full end-to-end lifecycle. And if you're a backend engineer in one of those teams, then you're even on call for the services. So
right. So this is like the CMDB stuff. Also stuff that's tracked in a CMDB if you update it.
So a lot of the things in Backstage are built around this concept of ownership and you owning your own software. So here we can see that we are owning in this team 29 different services, a couple of websites, data endpoints, which is basically data pipelines in Spotify terminology, and some other things like GCP project, Google Cloud project, etc. We can even use Backstage as a primary way to communicate to our engineers as well. What I mean by that is that as we grew as a company, it got increasingly hard to communicate best practices, things that we in the platform organization wanted you to do, etc. So one of the clear examples of how we use Backstage is around managing and visualizing migrations and upgrades that people need to go to. So since you are in charge of your own software, you're also in charge of migrating from technology A to technology B during various times. For example, Python is getting, Python 2 is getting deprecated or end of life, and we want everyone with Python services to move to Python 3. So rather than sending out a lot of emails to the rest of the organization and just telling them their status, what we did is that we visualized the progress of this team inside Backstage. And this again,
that's fun. There's I was talking about OKRs and KPIs and metrics a while ago, and one of the things with an OKR is transparency, making it visual to everyone. So you've kind of got that built in here. These are technical OKRs. I suspect when it comes to OKRs, that whole notion that it can only be about business value, when it gets down to developers, are just like, how about not? How about it actually is incredibly important that we migrate to Python 3, and we're not going to represent that as some sort of customer-facing jargon. We're just going to say migrated to Python 3. But you can see that there's some transparency around what am I trying to think of? Priorities, goals, things that teams need to do, I suppose.
Like a common pattern, that we surface the right information, focus on the engineer.
And I think what we're looking at here, probably to emphasize the point of all of this, is this is just what Spotify does. Now, it's kind of handy that if they provide this, it could be kind of the way that people start doing things in the Spotify way, which people love, right? You remember how much people like to like the Spotify thing. It's actually, I remember was it a year or so ago, or a couple of years, I went and kind of did a deep dive into the Spotify way. And what you find out is that like so many things, it's evolved over time. So you've got to make sure to keep up with what the current Spotify way is if you want to do the Spotify way and not just rely on older things, which is a part of the way, is to be adapting all the time. Anyways, so you could customize this to whatever you want. This is just their sort of thing, which I think is nice. A lot of enterprise architecture and governance that can go on here.
Like an ownership in Backstage, and then we assume, or we let engineers with that information make choices. And in this case, we even took it a bit longer or further, where you can drill into a specific migration and look at how is the rest of Spotify doing. We're at 51%, and you can even go get some healthy gamification going, like looking at different teams and how.
So we have a lot of stuff in Tanzu land to do application modernization. You might remember like the application transformer, and there's like a navigator discovery thing, right? That pumps out a lot of these metrics. So it'd be interesting. Again, so let's imagine something beyond Spotify. Let's imagine a large bank. Someone, is it JP Morgan Chase or Citibank? I get them mixed up, but they have like 20,000 developers worldwide, right? Like, or someone like an Air France KLM has, I think 2,500 applications, right? So think in the order of thousands of applications and tens of thousands of developers or thousands of developers. And you want to modernize what's going on there, right? So it would be really nice to get visibility into what other teams are doing and to kind of like maybe even surface ways they're modernizing, but also as a manager, as the EAs and other people running this, to just get dashboards of the progress on things, right? You need to have like some visibility into it. So pumping all of that data from the tools that we have and whatever else, that would be interesting to see in the dashboard, right? To kind of like monitor the status of things. Now, this will very quickly turn into crap that no one pays attention to and is annoying if those metrics are not updated, right? Because people will be judged on these metrics, and if they don't trust the metrics to represent what they're doing, and if people can't trust the metrics, you'll get into a conversation where it's like, oh, you can't pay attention to that because it's not updated. Here's the real things that we've manually gathered together. Then that's a problem. But it's sort of like if you find yourself getting into that issue, then you're doing it wrong. And you need to fix that stuff. But people just kind of fall into that. Same way that we got an entryway here in the stairway where you can take your shoes off and everything. And eventually it just becomes a big pile of shoes, and it's very upsetting, and you can't ever find gloves, and things get lost, but you're supposed to keep that stuff organized, and then it's more efficient to do. And in your personal life, maybe that's fine, but in a work environment, it should be part of what you're doing to basically keep your shoes organized so you can always find your gloves and your bike keys. And that becomes a critical part that I think needs to be encouraged and tracked, part of the culture, that you actually keep your shoes organized so that your dashboards don't become just a bunch of junk that people don't like.
All the come in this process has been very, very helpful for us, both helping us in the infrastructure teams to drive adoption of certain technologies, but also making it much, much easier for our customers to know what is expected from them. All right, so going back to the ownership aspect here.
This is a fun little word choice thing. You see, he's from the SRE, the platform operations, the platform builder teams, and he said our customers, which means developers inside the organization, right? That's a good mindset.
Number of services. So if I drill into one of these services, I get deeper in. So now I'm starting to look at what are all the different services that my team owns, and I get this service catalog, if you will, or software catalog with some additional information, such as is this component, is this in production, do we have PagerDuty set up, are all the tests passing as they should, etc., etc.
Now this part is very exciting. So this is that third part I was going over that is very commonly, I don't know universally, but I'll speak in universal, in absolutes, has been missing from developer tools for a long time. And that is, and again, this is what CMDBs were supposed to do, and systems management dashboards. Don't worry about all that stuff unless you're older like me and you're just curious. But the developer, especially if they have ownership in production, or they should just be curious, even if they don't kind of own the production status of something. It's important for them, the teams, to kind of see what their stuff is running, to kind of know the services that they're in charge of, the status of it. Maybe, I don't know, what we got, tests, yep, to kind of know, and this is the status of how they're, of the tests that they have. I don't know what efficiency is, but you can get a look, if that team owns that stuff, then they can know how it's doing in production. And I think this would be a great way of, like, if you imagine like all the different services or microservices that a team might have or depend on, they can kind of get a sense for what's going on in there. Like, I think newspaper must be like the interesting items, the news that we saw there, so they can kind of check on that status and know about it. I don't know. I mean, having an inventory of the stuff, but also not only an inventory and like a spreadsheet, but knowing the status of it and how it's passed through there, that's important. And then also you can imagine from an audit and compliance, a governance standpoint, and I'll get to this hopefully in one of the 3 links, something that the U.S. Army, they built a platform on top of Kubernetes that helps a lot with a lot of their compliance stuff. This is also great for auditors who could actually go in and audit things in real time. But assumably, you can also get a dump of this to kind of see that it's been certified to pass things, to pass different tests and certifications that you have. I mean, it's great if you keep this up to date and it's actually let's say even on a 24-hour window lagging of what's happening, you'll have solved the CMDB problem, which, a CMDB does a lot of great stuff if it actually does it.
A quality indicator that we call test certification at Spotify, where we can see, are we fulfilling best practices when it comes to testing? And again, coming back to this pattern that we use around like visualizing information for engineers and asking them to make a decision. This is a way we do that. We can visualize that this is not certified, and we can even use some indicators if this is a strong thing that we want them to do. All right. Next step. So let's say this is a number of services that we have. Let's drill deeper into one of these services. So in this case, we have a service called newspaper. I know that because I see it here. And this newspaper service is a standard microservice, one out of thousands of microservices that runs in production at Spotify. And from this overview page, I can get some overview information of who's.
So this is, in a CMDB, you call this a CI? I forget what you call like the final node, like the final thing that you look at. It's probably like an asset or an entity or whatever, but this will be fun.
Owner, like it happens to be me. I can see the technical owner. I can see that this is owned by this team. I can even, and this is like information that is available to everyone at Spotify. So if now I found it through my ownership, I could also imagine searching across the whole ecosystem of whatever, websites, apps, services, documentation, and you can find, if I select, for example.
So one thing I'm always interested in with this kind of stuff is and again, you can start to see how Backstage is, a generic system for whatever you want to put on the screen here. It's an unhelpful phrase, but there's also a way of working, a methodology kind of inherent in all of this, right? And for example, he keeps mentioning teams own things, right? And then also, it's just also assumed in this way of working that you're going to be using you're going to have dependencies. I guess you're not supposed to have a dependency, but you're going to be dependent. You're going to use a bunch of other services, and you'll want to kind of combine them together and drill into them. So there's a whole way of going about doing software that's kind of scurrying behind a lot of this, which probably these kind of things are very rarely documented, but it kind of helps you understand the need for and how you use these sort of tools. That's some useless commentary. Let's go on.
Say I want to search for service and the artist service, and there's a service called artist that is owned by a different team, and I can find that because all the software is in one.
Now look at that. That's a fun. Here is just like, let's take a quick little screenshot here. So this, I presume, I don't know if this is like live Spotify stuff. That would be funny, right? For as vaunted, as Spotify was, if they do demos on live systems. I don't know what kind of chaos monkey nonsense that would be, but like, this is a good, just tiny amount of Spotify microservices. So that's fun. Like it's a very small amount, but you can see each of these, I assume, is like a microservice in Spotify, right? So it's often hard to kind of get an idea of what microservices are and the scoping of them. But you can see, I guess, I don't know what artist sources would be, identity service, storyline, Cassandra, oh boy. And then, so, and then how many do they have? It looks like they have, for artist alone, there's like over 4,000 services. So that's delightful. That's a lot.
It's like in one software catalog, all the different types. And this is also where we start to see like some other integrations. For example, technical documentation the way we do technical documentation on Spotify is through, as I said in the beginning, a docs-like code approach, meaning that engineers write technical documentation in Markdown files together with their code. So if they want to change documentation, they can do that simultaneously as changing the code in the same book.
So this is another thing that I think is part of the Spotify way of thinking, at least what they're doing, and therefore shows up in Backstage, is that each team not only owns the code and running of the service, but they own documenting what the service does and kind of this view of it. And that they check all that in as part of their code in the same way from the infrastructure as code days, where you or GitOps or whatever you want to call it nowadays, where you check in the configuration insofar as that makes sense, except for secrets or whatever. You also check in all this meta information about your project, right? So the docs live in the source code and they can be generated by it. And if there's some YAML file that's your Backstage plugin stuff that also gets checked in here. So all of that kind of, I don't know what to call that stuff, but that becomes part of what the team owns and part of what the project is as well, which is part of what allows this stuff to hopefully be more, accurate, to not fall into the CMDB trap. The CMDB trap is that like keeping it up to date in a time window that makes it useful is very difficult. and no one really has the time for it. So you kind of make that the responsibility of the product owners, the development teams, I think, or something like that. So all that meta information, the docs and other stuff, maybe it's not even meta information, it's part of the product, but it's managed as if it were code.
Request, which makes it more likely that documentation is kept up to date, which is a plus. And we can also view that documentation right here in Backstage. So during CI process, documentation is built into like a nice looking documentation site, and it's available in Backstage at a predicted URL. I can also go, so this was for documentation for one of our software components. I can even go into like we also have like a landing page for documentation as whole. So if you want to search across, not just for one component, but you want to search across all technical documentation inside Spotify, you can do that from Backstage as well. And we have then added some additional, automation and also additional like use cases on top of documentation. You can see like what are the most important documentation, get some high-level overview stuff, as well as what we call the golden paths, which are tutorials that we ask everyone that is new to go through.
Now, it would be an impossible task, I'm going to say, in an organization of 20,000 developers to finally get all of them to synchronize on this one way of doing stuff. But, it's good to try. And especially if you're modernizing applications and kind of refreshing everything, it's nice to have, like, let's all just try to use the same documentation base. And I think by nature of it being open source and therefore free and open to use, you probably have a pretty good shot. And also with the Spotify brand, like I was mentioning, like there's a lot to be said for the Spotify halo. Like people basically give them the benefit of the doubt that whatever they're doing must be awesome. So you could grab some people's attention. Versus if I were to say, like, do things in the Microsoft way of developing, or the VMware way of doing documentation, or the Cisco way of doing docs. Like people might be a little more suspicious, and so it's nice to kind of launder it in through a good brand there.
The backend service or mobile feature or machine learning.
I think Google would still have that kind of appeal to it if people use their documentation method, but who knows what that is.
So every discipline of Spotify has what we call a golden path, which takes you from following the tutorial, takes you from A to B, like creating a new website or spinning up a new machine learning model, etc. Okay. Switching back to the services overview page. So the question is then, what is a plugin in this case? Plugins are essentially all of these different tools that you see here on the left-hand side. And the trick that we have pulled off is that rather than having one team that builds like the whole developer portal, we have been able to like unlock other teams within our platform or infrastructure organization.
So there's another like Spotify way thing is you can see any project, these are the major components that it's driven of, right? So this is, what would you call this? I mean, this is some pretty hardcore enterprise architecture that says all applications have these components and follow these things so that they can fit into the overall way that we're running, which is great. And again, I'm assuming you could probably, I assume they open source this stuff. You could start with that as your template or establish your own. And so in the Tanzu application platform, I don't know if we have all of these things drawn out or what, but like part of what we're doing, the templates that we have are, the whole idea of a lot of what's going on in the Tanzu application platform is helping you specify and customize this for your organization and making it as easy as possible for developers to get up and running, just as we kind of been seeing here.
To build the parts that they own. So for example, we have a team at Spotify that manages our CI.
Now, this is another important thing, and why I think something to me like Backstage is confusing is it's like a Kubernetes. Backstage is a platform for building platforms, right? But what's really valuable for an organization is when you get to this specificity to what the templates are, right? Like just having a generic platform for building out this, like, is not a big deal. Like that, everyone's got that. Everyone doesn't have it, whatever. It's not a big deal. What becomes very valuable is the actual usage of it, what you've built out of it, and kind of specifying what this architecture is. And hopefully that's exciting for EAs because it means they can build this stuff for their organization or kind of discover what they already have and really, I don't know, start to make more of a runtime setup for it.
Infrastructure and the running of builds and all that. They are the experts in CI and take care of that. And they don't only maintain like the actual infrastructure behind the scenes, but they also build a UI in Backstage. They build a plugin essentially. So this plugin, everything you see here is a plugin that is owned by a team that is responsible for our CI. And what we in the platform team and what Backstage provides to them is this canvas to draw on, and like reusable components such as this data grid that they can easily just take their data, their API, and expose that information in Backstage. There's also a consistent like information architecture. Like so, every plugin has this support button. So if I want to report a bug on this, or if I want to find the official documentation, or get in touch with the team, it's all done the same. if I switch to another plugin owned by a different team, the experience is somewhat different because it's a different use case, but it's similar enough that it's like familiar when you're switching between the different things.
Right.
So imagine this.
So you've got
actually
conventions, familiarity, which are nice.
Kubernetes and deployed using Spinnaker, but our engineers don't really have to know that because the only thing that they interface with is this UI in Backstage where they can go and deploy and redeploy their services. And again, same consistent way to get support and then find out how to use this plugin.
What is
another example is if I want to look at API documentation for this.
What is gservice account? gserviceaccount.com. Let me rewind a little bit. What was it? gserviceaccount.com. Let's search for that. Service accounts. There you go. So you can see they're using some Google Cloud.
And deployed using Spinnaker, but our engineers don't really have to know that because the only thing that they interface with is this UI in Backstage where they can go and deploy and redeploy their services. And again, same consistent way to get support and then find out how to use this plugin. Another example is if I want to look at API documentation for this component or this backend service, it's also another plugin in Backstage. So our engineers
more
tools,
standardizing things.
They can use Backstage to do pretty much all their infrastructure use cases. So this was a service. Let's switch back to the managed. We can not only manage services.
So that's a similar thing in the Tanzu application platform. One of the first things in the first beta that was in it was the like an API portal, listing of APIs that are available, I don't know, in your organization. And not only the docs for it, but also a way of kind of like testing out and discovering what those APIs are. Again, all towards like, if you're building out a platform, a development stack for your gigantic organization to use, you have to start thinking about ways to kind of automate and standardize all of that documentation, that discoverability that your customers, the developers, will be using.
So software, let's say workflows, which is like basically a data pipeline. This is what powers some products like Discover Weekly and stuff like that. So our team also owns a couple of data pipelines. And as you can see here, this is like a different type. It's a workflow, which means a data pipeline. And it has a different set of plugins. So in this case, our data infrastructure has built different kinds of plugins that you can use to manage your data pipelines. But they are consistently, some things are consistent still. So if I'm used to doing managing a backend service or a website, it's easier for me to switch over to doing data engineering because the tools are in some one place and they're also familiar enough. So in this case, data lineage or dependencies is an important part of troubleshooting your pipelines. So,
ooh, look at that fancy dependency graph there. We got a lot of stuff, and you click on this little plus thing. What a demo!
There's a plugin that does that. So that is pretty much it for the demo. This is like the same model all over. Different teams building different parts of the Backstage Backstage experience, and we are hoping that, coming back to the goal of the open source project, we're hoping that in a similar way that we have enabled this inside Spotify, we're hoping that for all the different software open source projects out there, if there's a Jenkins, if people are using Jenkins, there's a Jenkins plugin for that. If people are using Grafana, there's a Grafana plugin for that. If people are using Circle CI, there's a plugin for that, and that hopefully we can create a consistent experience where, regardless of what infrastructure you use in your company, you can either build your own plugins or, more importantly, maybe get open sourced plugins provided by the community, and then you deploy Backstage internally in your environment and just pick the open source plugins that matches your infrastructure stack, and you put them together, and then hopefully you get a better experience for your customers than you had before. That is our hope. And so far we have gotten off to a very good start, I would say. There's a lot of interest, as indicated by all of you here now listening to this. But we also gotten lots of people helping out, contributing, starting to build plugins, building out the core parts of the project. So we're pretty happy about that. Okay, with that, I think we're going to jump over to.
All right, maybe we'll watch that later, but we'll skip over the Q&A, and then let's go. How to manage? What is this? How do you? How long is this one? Because that might make documentation easy. So these demos things, see, even looking through them after that introduction, you can kind of get an idea of what you would be doing. Let's pick one of them. Control costs. That might be interesting. But what is something, manage your tech health? Let's see how long this one is. Okay.
How to create a microservice or any software component.
So here's what I want to, looking at this. One, we kind of know how to create a microservice, but it'd be interesting to see an example that demonstrates the concept. The concepts being, we want a way of templating out a new project. We want to set all the norms and the standards for the project information, the documentation, discoverability, And then also look into kind of like the architectural standards, the enterprise architecture that Spotify is using here. And then also just to see how the tool actually does it. So we'll see what happens.
In Backstage. Hello, my name is Stefan. I'm the product manager for Backstage. In this video, I'm going to show a very common use case for Backstage, and that is creating a new microservice. So everything is done through Backstage. I go here. This is how you create any kind of component in Backstage. And I click create. What happens now is that I get a list of different templates that I can choose from. All of these are standardized templates within the Spotify ecosystem. In this example, I'm going
to template, great word.
Pick a Spring Boot service template. So I'll click that, give it a name, Stefan Demo. Description. I pick the owner of the service and where it should live in our GitHub enterprise repository. So click the next, fill in some deployment information, which project it should live in, and then
I mean, I guess they run everything.
I have a look at review this thing before I create it, and then I
create press release about
click
that.
Create component. What happens now is three things. So first of all, a new project is getting created.
Ooh, look at that
repository in GitHub.
They got graphics.
There, a new backend service, like a Hello World application, is created for me based on the template that I selected. Secondly, the standardized way of doing documentation at Spotify is also configured in the repository. And thirdly, our CI is hooked up automatically. This means that our CI
See, now there you go. That's a big thing right there. Is the developers don't have to worry. They don't have to go to the big old wiki page to look how to start their project of all the files that they need, and then also how to set it into the build environment. Also, this implies that there is a standard way of doing builds, a standard CI system, which is a huge leap for most organizations. That would be a good thing to start with if you haven't standardized on a way of building your code.
Environment picks up the build and starts building automatically. So the backend service has been successfully created. From here, I can go and look in GitHub Enterprise to see the code that has been created for me. You can also see that there's a documentation folder. But more interestingly, I can
also
go back
Spring Boot
and
service,
I can have a look
notably.
at the service now registered inside Backstage. We can see the owners of the service. It's a team.
All right. Now remember, this is the screen that I got all excited about. So let's look at this. They're monitoring like energy usage stuff. That's fantastic. Or I don't know if that's actually what that is. So, okay. I like this.
Tools and the product manager, which happens to be me. From here, we can also see that CI has picked up our build and it has started to build.
See, now that's huge, right? Is that right away? You don't have to futz around with how to build things. And I would also assume you probably don't have to futz around with filing a ticket to like get a developer lab set up and services, like all of that kind of automated stuff. I mean, that stuff's all scurrying around in the background as far as like hard problems that were solved to make things this easy and plugged into here, which is fine. But it's good to keep that in mind, that essentially what we've seen here is replacing a very manual ticket-driven process, getting a bunch of files and like, copying a bunch of files, the defaults, figuring out how to configure them, sort of, I don't know, even building your code and then running it, executing it through a build pipeline and then actually deploying it as well to some environment. In theory, a lot of that can be, or even here has been automated for you, which takes a lot of work, but to get to that point, but is very valuable.
So that's it. Now I've created a standard compliant backend service and registered it into the Spotify service catalog. And I never had to leave Backstage or even learn the ins and outs of setting up a Spring Boot application. Everything was integrated in.
I mean, but you probably should know how to program it at some point because you open up an IDE, so you can't remain that ignorant about things. But the important part is not that how you would set up a Spring Boot thing, but all the particular idiosyncratic stuff that happens in your organization that you need to worry about. I think, let's see. I might be getting a package delivery, so I might have to leave here briefly. But let's keep watching.
The UX environment I was already familiar with. If I wanted to create another type of component, for example, a website, the procedure is the same. And once here again, I just scroll down to see what different types of software components I can create. And in this example,
look at that. If you slowed down and watched that thing, you could learn an incredible amount about how Spotify runs and their internal architecture by looking at their projects.
I can have a standard-based React.js web application. It's the same process for creating a data pipeline with BigQuery, a data science tool, an application feature in Swift, or even documentation, with all your infrastructure tooling integrated in Backstage. Once you learn how to create one component, you already know how to create the others as well.
Whoa, what a tagline. Let me write that one down. That's good stuff. Could use some workshopping. Once you know how to create one component, you know how to create other ones as well. See, that could use some work, but you've got something going on there. Okay, let's see. Since that was so short, what was the one? Search all your services. Yeah. Managing data pipelines. Let's look at two more if they're short enough. One, I want to see the health. I think this one will be small.
How to get an overview of your tech health in Backstage. Hi, I'm Jimmy, an engineer at Spotify. Today, I will show you the Tech Insights plugin in Backstage. First, imagine the following scenario. You're a tech responsible for multiple teams in the company. There's been a decision that we need to migrate all our data pipelines from our old version of the Skio framework to the latest.
I'm getting stressed out.
You need to understand how much effort this will require.
I don't even know how long it's going to take. I'm upset.
You're all in the midst of migrating to Python 3 and Java 11. So you open up your spreadsheet containing a manually curated list of all the services and pipelines.
All right, so this is your asset database. The alternate for using a CMDB. If you remember when I recommended this video by John Willis, he was saying he goes in and interviews people and they say like, oh yes, John, we use a CMDB, and then he'll ask them to walk through a scenario like this. How did you migrate something or solve an incident? And they're like, well, first we open up the service status spreadsheet. And at that point, John was like, I got a live one. And he's like, but I thought you had a CMDB. And they say like, oh yeah, we have one, but no one uses it because it's not up to date. And that's, you have a spreadsheet like this. That you go in to see what all your services are, like the status of them. It's manually updated. It's not cool, but it's the state of the art.
That your team owns. Add a new column Skio version and start reaching out to the engineers to gather the data, hoping to get everything right. Secretly, you wish there was a better way to do this.
You're my favorite. You got the person. Let's find it. Where is the Tupperware falling out? This is like what you're experiencing. I think this is basically one day I need to do some how-to marketing thing, and this is the basis of all enterprise software marketing. Is there's got to be a better way. Sorry for the stuff under there, not so tasteful. Anyways, let's go.
Enter Tech Insights. In Backstage, you would just click on the Tech Insights tool to reach an overview page showing all ongoing migrations in the company.
So you remember in the first video going over this, how each team reports on the, there's probably some phrase they have for this, but the enterprise architecture OKRs or KPIs or MBOs, the things that the enterprise architects tell the development teams that they need to work on that year. Upgrading things and stuff like that. So let's see. Now, what we're going to want to see is basically, now, for as much as people decry spreadsheets, that spreadsheet view is pretty awesome. So maybe if they can export some way of looking at that just for more quickly consuming it, because going to look at these sad and happy donuts for every single project, you remember when they search for services, in the demo, he just typed in artist as a keyword to search for services, and there were like 4,884 of them. So you don't want to, and that's just for artist. So let's say you only have 4,000 services instead of, I'm guessing there's 20,000 or more, if that was just for artist. You don't want to have to click on these donut pages 20,000 times. You're going to want a pretty condensed report, like a spreadsheet, which is totally fine to use as a view, but not as your actual database. Let's see what happens.
Click on the ski migration to get more information about it. I see what the migration is about, the deadline, a link to technical documentation, etc. There's a top list showing how well different parts of the company are doing. I click on my team to get a further breakdown. There seems to be one team in particular that is not doing so well. So I click on that team to get a list of all their components and can immediately see which ones haven't migrated. Tech Insights can also be used to quickly get an overview of my tech entropy. By clicking the Components tab, I get a tabular view of all the things that a team owns. For instance, I may want to ensure we're on the latest version of our internal Apollo framework in all our services. I can filter the list by typing Apollo in the search box and sort in the framework column to see which ones are on the latest version. All the data is collected automatically. Before Tech Insights, all this had to be gathered manually, a tedious and error-prone approach that made our engineers want to gouge their eyeballs out from staring at spreadsheets all day.
Figuratively
With
speaking.
our internal Tech Insights plugin for Backstage, being on top of our tech infrastructure is now a pleasant task.
So there wasn't like a bulk export, but I'm going to assume there was one. Now let's watch one more video, because I think these are very illustrative. What we do need to see is how to create those plugins. Let's look at cloud costs, because I'm curious how they do that.
How to manage cloud costs from the ground up using the Cost Insights plugin for Backstage. Hi, I'm Tim, a platform engineer at Spotify.
Tim.
Cloud infrastructure allows our teams to develop and scale quickly. Of course, the benefits of the cloud can also be a drawback. It's so easy to spin things up that
It's a nice thing you have when you work for a highly valued, very high profile, consumer facing company like Spotify is you can probably just get, an afternoon of a graphics person to do some cool graphics for you, even ones that move.
you can get yourself into trouble. We wanted a way to keep cloud costs under control, but
Or you might have hired developers who just know how to do that because, they like it.
the top-down approach wasn't right for us. It would restrict the autonomy of our engineering teams, discourage experimentation, and ultimately hinder growth. Instead, we found that if we put costs where engineers could see them, cost optimization came naturally. Just another part of the everyday development process. So that's where the Cost Insights plugin comes in. Since it lives right inside Backstage, cost management becomes integrated into the daily work of engineers. Let's take a look and see how it works. The first thing you'll see at the top is a message about how your team is doing. We don't want teams worrying about
I could do with a
cost
comma
unless
there
it's a
after,
problem.
hey, but, whatever.
In this example, there's one cost alert shown, but for a team with low spend, you would see a big thumbs up instead. This overview shows the daily cloud cost for the team. This is a high-level view where you can quickly see trends and look for spikes in cost. But how can you tell if something costs too much? We believe the key is being able to compare cloud costs against business metrics. An important point we make is that cost growth is okay and expected. When your business is growing, costs will go up.
Now, there's a fundamental problem most organizations are going to have is there's too much separation behind revenue, business outcome and value, and what IT people are doing. So, because it's a relatively new thing and relatively small, I'm guessing it's pretty easy to know which chunk of IT, which chunk of code maps to what type of revenue or kind of way of figuring out business value at Spotify. But again, going back to those giant organizations, that's another sort of hygiene you're going to need to work on is like, how would I even get for this application? How would I even understand what revenue it brings in or what business value it brings in? And, you got to figure that out, let alone get on a 24-hour or a 30-second cycle of being able to refresh that information. It looks like this is probably on a daily basis or something. But start thinking about how you would do that. Because if you can't do it, I mean, a lot of the problems that you might be suffering from if you feel like you need to modernize, it's just because, you're flying blind, as they say. You can't really justify why your IT is valuable. You can't use, if we made this change, did it make the business run better or worse? Like, you've got to start having some indicators about the effects of changes that you're putting in, and if you're doing even a good job in the first place.
Example has what looks like an alarming upward trend in cost. But if we switch to cost per daily active user, the story changes. The cost per user is actually going down. These business metric comparisons are configurable in the plugin, so you can evaluate your costs against whatever metric is important to you. Next, let's look at action items. In this case, a certain project has spiked up in cost over the last quarter. To help troubleshoot the cause, we show the quarter-over-quarter cost change for each cloud product. Compute engine costs are clearly where we should look here. Graphs are great, but another way we make costs more tangible is to make the numbers more relatable. So here we show the growth in cost is equal to about 1 engineer. At Spotify, we found that phrasing growth in engineering...
I remember that, I think from an old Spotify talk. Yeah, but that's fun, right? It's like the amount of money we're spending is one of you, basically.
Time rather than sheer dollar amounts helps teams make the right trade-off decisions.
I'm going to file this away as, let's write this this would be a good little mini video thing. I want to make more of those little mini videos in the field. Let me bring this over here. Oh, good. There's nothing very embarrassing there. But what I'm going to write is, here we go. So, Tanzu Talk topic idea, tiny video. Spotify quantifies costs in terms of engineers to make the cost of something more relatable. So, if you're looking for people to care about cost controls, both in that it's okay to spend money to make money, they call that invest in growth, but also save money, you should make it relatable to the people whose habits you want to change. Now, historically, like someone like Walmart, what they found is Walmart put prices of cardboard boxes on the boxes so that staff would know how much was being spent. Things like that. You make costs visible, but also relatable. Hey! There you go. To optimize costs. See, that would be a great little short video there. And then let me put a link to share, copy it there. So there you go. Now we've got a little idea for a tiny video. Let's go back.
We always need to evaluate.
Now, this video is just showing you, like, again, a usage of Spotify. And I'm assuming this plugin would be available. You have to do some integration. Now, after this one, I want to find like what it means to build a plugin to see if there's an example of that.
Our optimization is worth the engineering effort. Finally, we have cost breakdowns for each cloud product that you care about. These are configurable as well. This example shows Google Cloud Platform, but you could just as easily have Amazon or Azure products here. For each product, we show cost comparison.
See, look, there's another one. That's really fun to do it in terms of engineers. See, you could. This can go the other way though. Is you could also do it in terms of cups of coffee, or I always joke, like, whenever I'm complaining about spending the company I'm working with not wanting to spend money, I always wonder, like, well, how much do they spend on like coffee stirrers? and like, coffee creamer a month? Like, is it more or less than this fancy microphone I want to buy that people tell me I can't buy? And makes you wonder about the priorities of spending, but never mind.
The things you've deployed. For Compute Engine, we
Coffee is very important. That probably is the highest priority.
break down cost by service rather than per host. For data processing, we show pipelines. This is another goal of Cost Insights, to show costs in terms your engineers are familiar with. With the Cost Insights plugin, our engineers have discovered cloud optimizations that have saved us millions of dollars.
So it is a plugin. So that's another thing. I was speaking earlier about, it's an easy enough thing, as I'm fond of saying, anything you're going to code just takes 15 minutes. So you could program up on your own what Backstage is doing in just 15 minutes. No problem. But what becomes valuable are all the configurations and the ways of using it, the plugins that everyone else has. So this is one that you could just take and start using, or if you wanted to see what we have going. I haven't actually looked into this, but since we're using it for the Tanzu application platform, I assume that a lot of the things that we have will be plugins as well. So you could just start with a way of doing cost analysis that kind of fits in and matches this way of doing things by just taking this. And I don't know if the kids say fork anymore, but you could customize it to the way that you want to operate. So you don't have to start from zero, right? You can start with a template of doing things.
We're sharing this tool so that you too can build cost awareness at your company from the...
All right, that's nice. So now let's see documentation easily, create microservices, manage data pipelines. All right, so all of this stuff is usage of it. Let's see. So here, now, do they go over? Yeah. So I'm not going to watch this full one. Let me start off here. So here's...
Who owns this service and who's on call for it at the moment?
So I want to look through this one to see if we actually get an idea.
As a solution to all of these projects, we built System C.
To see how you make a plugin.
Build history, capacity management.
Yeah, but let's keep going.
As a tribute to our roots in music, we also gave the project a new name, Backstage.
Right. So up to this point is just the history of how they get to it.
So we entered the golden age. We saw a soar of new plugins entering Backstage. The introduction of tech docs made it easy to write and find documentation. Tech Insights brought tracking of fleet-wide migration efforts, and Cost Insights started suggesting ways that you could improve your cloud spend. All of these plugins and many more were developed without much interaction of the Backstage core team. One of the metrics we use to measure productivity at Spotify is onboarding time of our new engineers. Growth in tooling in other domains like data engineering. Spotify has always been open about its engineering culture. And we were showing Backstage.
And it's used by these people.
Like latest GitHub.
There is one thing
actually happy with the reception
he mentions here, which I think is an important principle
companies that publicly state
that I go over all the time, which is in a large organization, whenever you're building your own platform or coming up with your own methodology, it's important to come up with your own names and brands for it, right? So if you're using Backstage internally, you could say that it was Backstage, but you also want to come up with a name for what you're building there, a name for your product. And I think, what does he say? American Airlines calls there like Runway or something like that. I'm not going to search for it, but it's notable that like at a place like American Airlines and other places that they come up with their own names for the platforms they're building apart from the technologies and the methodologies they're building on it. Because people like that more. And I think it allows them to feel free to customize it to how things work for them. So let's see.
Tooling scattered across your bookmark bar and makes it available in one view. The plugins that you see on this page are selected based on the type of component we're looking at. In this case, a service. And you might have different set of toolings for things like websites or libraries. We call these front-end components and the backing metadata store the software catalog, and it's one of the core features of Backstage. You will often have a lot more pages and plugins in a Backstage installation, But for the rest of this talk, we're going to stay focused on the catalog.
Let me turn that up for you a little bit.
And this was a quick look at the front end. Now let's have a look at the data, which is back in this page.
Okay. See, here we go. Now we're digging into it a little bit.
And at the core of Backstage, as with all CNCF projects, is the technology that we all know and love, YAML. And what you see here is a catalog info
Some good
file
Nordic
for a service
delivery.
With
Nordic
actually
humor
the service
delivery.
we saw on the previous
Just making
slide.
a joke there.
And typically these files live
Very
with your
dry.
source code and are named cataloginfo.yaml. And you might recognize this format as it's heavily inspired
European,
by
I
the
should
Kubernetes
say.
resource descriptions.
Most all
And
Northern
you'll see
Europeans
many
would
common
deliver a
concepts
joke that
between
way.
the two. We call each instance of these things an entity. A component is a kind of entity defined by the kind field in the YAML. And so far we've talked a lot about components, but Backstage aims to model the bigger picture. So components can be part of a system, depend on resources, and of course implement APIs. Each of these are different kinds of entities within the catalog, and they have their own catalog frontend. It's important to mention that this is not a model that is set in stone for you as an adopter.
All right. I wish you had a label for this. Because I think this is the architecture of a plugin? Maybe? I don't know. Backend service, pipeline, resource. Okay. Or, I mean, this might be the architecture of any Spotify service. I'm not sure what this is of, but let's keep going.
Backstage. It can be reworked or extended to fit your organization, just like custom resource definitions in Kubernetes. In our own installation, for example, we model things like native applications and machine learning models. So going back to the YAML, let's look at some other things that we share with Kubernetes, like the metadata and spec sections. We use the spec sections to model things that are specific to each kind, while the format of the metadata section is shared across all entities. A bunch of these fields are standardized in our model, like name and links, but all information related to plugins are stored under annotations. That's because they provide an open namespace that can evolve over time. So let's look at how this data is used to build out the front end. The highlighted sections in this example drive different parts of the UI.
And can I just say, as a 2000s Java developer in the era of XML, like one of the things that like makes my skin crawl when I look at YAML is just like, where is the spec for it? Where's the STD or the XSL or whatever that specifies what the structure is and what it needs to look at? Or is it like in the dynamic languages world, the Ruby world, where it's just like, I don't know, man, figure it out. It's all dynamic. And I always think it's the second, which just like, I don't like to think that much, but the kids seem to love it.
The top links section produces a small link card on the overview page, and the PagerDuty annotations causes the PagerDuty card to be shown.
So the links, right. Oh, that would drive me bonkers. That you'd have to, for each of those icons, you would have to have this kind of indented well, and ugh, it's making me queasy. But then the annotation, so that goes down here. Wonder why that's an annotation, just like a little portal.
PagerDuty plugin then uses the value of the annotation in order to associate an entity with a service in PagerDuty. This pattern is something...
That's sort of like an old school portlet, where you're basically just, what are those used to be called, iframes? I'm guessing you're just sucking in like a view created somewhere else and listing it there. Totally cool.
Frequently use, where we keep a lightweight reference between an entity and an external system. Plugins then use that reference to fetch more data or take actions. In general, we strive to keep integrations lightweight, storing only what's necessary in the catalog. And something we haven't talked about yet is how engineers add entities to the catalog.
So at this point, I think there's an important thing that we've learned from my initial, isn't Backstage just a portlet framework. And it's like, yes, there is a portlet framework, but that is a trivial part of it. That's just the UI. I mean, that's just the literal framework for doing UIs. And then also the how you specify things, as we were just looking at. But why it's really valuable is that you have a community, starting with Spotify, that defines a lot of what those portlets are, right? Like we saw the cost optimization stuff that also defines the process of setting up a new project. So it's all of that stuff that is of the actual value. And then also the overall concept of like, I could build out those own tools as my own, right? Again, this is like the front end for your development stack. Oh, I'm gonna write that down. Let's, a front end for your development stack. I don't know. Sounds good to me.
And one way is to use manual registration of a YAML file in the UI. The locations get stored in the catalog and are then used to ingest the metadata. This method of registration allows us to give direct feedback to the user if something goes wrong, such as bad YAML or a duplicate name. Although manual registration is
14 minutes, right?
To use manual registration of a YAML file in the UI. The locations get stored in the catalog and are then used to ingest the metadata. This method of registration allows us to give direct feedback to the user if something goes wrong, such as bad YAML.
Now, one outstanding, which is to say remaining question, is why does this have anything to do with Kubernetes? Like, so far, that has not become a thing at all. Like, this could have been something, like, why is it a CNCF thing, right? Like, what is it, why are we marrying this up with Kubernetes versus, like, if I wasn't using Kubernetes, could I use this as well? I mean, the answer is probably always yes, you could, but it seems like you only use this if you're using Kubernetes. Let's write that down. Do you only use Backstage if you're a Kubernetes shop? That's a good question.
A duplicate name. Although manual...
Which, to put that another way, if you are already a Kubernetes shop, is it going to be easy to use Backstage? If I don't use Kubernetes, is it going to be more difficult, right? Like, am I adding in extra work versus some other alternative?
Registration is perhaps not the most common ways of getting data into the catalog. It's mostly used to register existing software. But if you're already using Backstage, you will be creating new projects through software templates, which is another core feature. They help you automate the creation of new projects, along with taking care of additional tasks such as registration. At Spotify, we use software templates to save engineering time and drive standardization.
Hey,
they're a great way to encode common patterns while also helping engineers. You run a template by filling out a form that it generates, which in turn executes a series of actions. These actions can range from creating a new project in your version control system to manage more specialized tasks like creating a monitoring bundle in Grafana. It's a bit similar to GitHub Actions if you ever use that. And we won't dive further into GitHub or into software templates in this talk, as they could really have a talk of their own.
Whoa.
Now let's look at the machinery that takes care of all of these registered locations and make them available for consumption. At the core of the catalog is a set of pluggable processors. And in a typical setup, the catalog will cycle through these locations to read YAML straight from repositories.
Then I'll wrap up.
It's important to note that the catalog itself is not the source of truth here. It serves as a collector and cache of information. However, processors can do much more than just reading YAML. They can, for example, handle validation or call out to external systems to decorate or even generate new entities. The catalog does give you a default set of processors, but writing your own ones is a key point of customization when adopting Backstage. Finally, after the entities have gone through this round of processing, they are made available through an API that powers the front end.
Sure.
We recognize that each organization have their own particular way of structuring software, and we intentionally did not attempt to make one solution to fit everyone.
What's this logo up here? I forget what
Because
that
of
is.
that, we provide a couple of different methods that can help populate your catalog with data. The one we already covered is manual registration. This method is built into the catalog, and it has its own API for management.
So this is how you get stuff into the system, a list of the services.
It might be that you simply want to ingest all catalog info YAML files that you can find in your Git repositories. For this, we can...
That's a big assumption that you have those in the first place. But that's probably part of modernizing applications or when you write new ones. And then, of course, I'm sure there's plugins. Like I was mentioning, the Tanzu application discovery and application transformer, that's generating a lot of metadata that if you had a plugin, it could suck that information in and kind of start to set that up. So that would be a great, hopefully we'll do that in the Tanzu application platform, kind of how do we bootstrap into using, a Backstage thing. Again, I need to investigate this working here, but, we probably do something like that. I don't know.
Use automatic discovery. You can, for example, point your catalog at a GitHub organization and have it ingest all of the catalog info YAML files that it can find.
Mm-hmm.
This is great because it skips the manual step and it makes your catalog a bit more resilient as you're not relying on the database to store their locations. It does, however, give you a little bit less control over when things are added and removed from the catalog, and it's also difficult to provide the same level of user feedback as with the manual flow. Another convenient method is through configuration. When deploying the catalog, you can provide it with a list of locations for it to include.
Speed this up.
This method is great if you're the one operating a Backstage instance. And you can, for example, use this to lock down who is allowed to add entities of a certain kind through rules in the catalog. A typical use case for this is to statically configure all of your software templates and then forbid users from registering any more of those. The last method we'll call custom processors. This is actually how all of these methods are implemented under the hood, but you can of course also build your own as the API is open. These can leverage patterns that are well established in your organization, and they might even be able to allow you to skip YAML altogether. You can, for example, rely on parsing Java POM files or package JSONs in order to generate your entities from scratch. Or you might have an existing inventory system that you want to bring in. An example of this is the Microsoft Graph processor, which was contributed by our awesome community. It uses the Microsoft Graph API to ingest organizational data and then makes that available as users and group entities in your catalog. Let's look at a more concrete example of automation using a catalog processor. TechDocs is another core feature of Backstage, and it takes markdown documentation that lives with your code and makes it searchable and readable within Backstage. To enable TechDocs for your component, you need to add a specific annotation to your catalog info file, which in turn then makes the documentation tab show up. Now, within an organization...
Let's take a moment. Where is... I think this will work. So if we want to look at directory docs, so we have this file and it says, because so in this case the annotation again is like a portlet that just loads up a web page. So someone has generated this, and this probably, because you've got a PagerDuty one too, so you're adding another annotation. And I'm guessing this is like some configuration. So you're saying the TechDocs plugin, you probably standardize that for any given thing, there's a /docs directory that has the docs. So down here, in addition to listing the PagerDuty thing of status or whatever, it also lists click here for docs, and it just knows that the convention is you should have a docs directory or something. I'm not sure.
Should agree that we always keep our documentation in the docs folder.
Well, okay, there we go.
If that folder exists, it must always contain markdown documentation. If that's the case, we can use a processor that checks if the folder is present, and in that case automatically adds the annotation. This can save us from keeping this annotation in YAML, but it does mean that we all need to adhere to this pattern. This example also highlights how, when you read entities back from the catalog, they will contain more information than your source YAML files.
All right, so you've got like enterprise architecture by norms rather than enforcement and explicit whatever. It's the old static versus dynamic typing.
This is similar to how Kubernetes works, where when you're reading an object back, it has more information than the original manifest that you applied. Now, let's have a look at the demo of Backstage. So I have my own local Backstage instance. We have chosen to use the catalog index page as our homepage, and this is where we can browse all of the components in our catalog. Right now, I'm looking at all of the
we got to stop using the actual Spotify system and listing everything that's actually in there. Let's come up with some demo ones
that I own, but I can also switch the filter over to see all of the entities in the organization. We can look at some of the other top-level tools, like the Tech Radar, which is a great way to align what technology you use. There's also software templates, which we talked about a bit. We can see here that we have a couple of different templates that we can use to create new components. Now, going back to our catalog page, we're heading into the greeter service, which is the one we talked about earlier. We can see the overview page here with an about card, a glimpse into the README, a collection of external links, and information.
It's like the Hello World service.
About the languages used in this component. We can scroll down to see our recent workflow runs, results of vulnerability scans.
All right. Let's take a look at it. So workflow runs, add a new feature with a bug, getting the hang of this. Okay. Yep, here's the PagerDuty thing, right? Remember they're including some web page, and below that should be a link to the docs. Don't report on languages they have. And let's go back just a little bit. Look at. So again, think about like if I want to see how the service is used. It's a greeter one, but imagine it is all the way back. Remember, you're writing a life insurance application thing, and you're going to be using a service called "Give Me a Quote." Quote me, the term, right? I don't know stuff, but you got a life insurance, you have a annual payment that you have to make for the amount of money you're insured based on your demographics. And you've gathered together that information and you want to give someone a quote in reply. There's probably a whole service, probably multiple, let's simplify it, that gives you what that quote is. So you can imagine you're like, all right, I want to use that service. And you go here, and this is going to be your view into figuring that out. I'm imagining you can go to the API and the docs to kind of see how to use it. You can see like the status of the project, how it's working, how it's even running, which is kind of interesting for discoverability.
About the languages used in this component. We can scroll down to see our recent workflow runs, results of vulnerability scans, and PagerDuty information, who's currently on call, and if the situation calls for it, we can even trigger an incident.
Mm-hmm.
We also have these tools along the top bar, so we can head over to the CI/CD tab to get a more in-depth view of our builds. We can also look at the technical documentation for this component. And we can also see what APIs this component provides.
So there you go. Those last two things are what people who use your service, your life insurance quote service, they would probably look at those the most, just to like start to learn how to use the service and get a sense of it in the documentation.
Consumes. So let's look at the Greet API that we are implementing. We see the same kind of overview page, but with slightly different cards. This is because we're looking at an API entity. We also have a different tab up here, definition. Here, we can straight actually see our open API specification for this API. But let's have back our Greeter component. Now, we talked about a lot of open source plugins that you can install in Backstage.
Now, all of that looks really simple, but I guarantee if you go into a large multi-thousand, tens of thousands of developer stuff, they have tons of different ways of doing it, if doing it at all. They might even just have a SharePoint site or a little, tiddly-wiki site that's listing this stuff instead of a standardized way of doing it, let alone where they check this stuff in and it's tracked and kept as up-to-date as possible.
So let's try installing one of those. We'll have a look at the To-Do plugin, which is able to scan your source code for to-do comments and then make them browsable within Backstage. So I have prepared a bit here to not have to wait for downloads and do any kind of live coding. But installing this plugin is split into two steps. There's a front-end component and a back-end component. So looking at the front end, we install the plugin really just by taking content from it and giving it a space in the UI. So in this case,
ooh, what are we doing there? So he's added. Man, I don't know what a TSX is. What is all this stuff? Yeah, this looks like thrilling stuff right here.
We're creating a to-do tab on our entity page and showing it there. Now, the installation of the backend plugin is a little bit more complex. This is all well documented in the README, and to be honest, it's mostly code.
Yep. So you're setting up the view. So basically you can, I don't know. Sorry I didn't narrate looking at that. That was thrilling.
So, heading over to our to-do branch, where we have the plugin installed. I head back to Backstage, we'll wait for it to reload. And now we should have the to-do tab. So let's head over into the to-do tab. And there we go. Now we have all of the to-dos in our project. And we can see here that I commented that we should not be hard-coding our greetings. I can also click this link to head over to GitHub to see the documentation in our, see the comment.
All right, that said, let's go back and see. So what is actually doing that? Because it's one thing to list like a bunch of configuration, but where's the code that's making a call to get a list somewhere? So what do we have? So gonna use these links, go to these things. So it's setting up routes. Thrilling. So here's when you go to this part of the URL, it wants you to call on this. So he just looked at to-do list. So he added in to-do, and then that's going to call off to some service called to-do, I guess. So then if we go down here, what is to-do.ts? So what does that look like? So, I don't know what that means. So we're creating up an endpoint so that when you go to /to-do, somehow it's going to map to this. So we create a plugin that's got all your nonsense here. And then it's making a promise. How quaint. And so we're passing in configuration. Okay. Oof. See, this is the bad part of like the old make everything explicit Java way of doing stuff is basically, yeah, he's just saying we've got a service called to do that has, we're not even going to look at what that service is. But when you go basically have that URL, that was a lot of work to say when you go to /to-do, go to this other URL and forward the output to that. But that's fine. That's the way programming is.
Coding our greetings. I can also click this link to head over to GitHub to see the documentation see the comment in our source code.
Oh, yeah, that's fun.
All right, let's head back to the presentation and wrap this up. We want to leave you with a couple of strategies that can help you be successful in adopting Backstage. The first one is to provide incentives. I, as a selfish engineer, should save time by adding my service to the catalog. Use carrots rather than sticks. As an example.
All right. Well, I will also watch this later. We need to wrap up because I've got something around 1:30 to do, and I also need to eat all sorts of other things. So I think that was great. I think I have a pretty solid grasp, as solid as I can, on what Backstage is, and more importantly, like why it exists, kind of problems it's solving, and why it needs to exist, if you will. Now, I still am not sure. I need to find out like why it's a Kubernetes thing. I mean, I know it runs on Kubernetes or in Kubernetes or something, but I'm not quite sure like if it's only for people who use Kubernetes, but whatever. It's kind of just background noise. But yeah, it's really nice. So it looks fun, and those videos were all very well done by the Spotify people. That's nice of it. So I want to go over. I'll just do it quickly, but let's go over. Oh, I didn't pick a third link. Well, whatever. Let's go over 2 links. It should be 3. I guess here we go. I'll throw in a third link. It'll be a little self-promotion thing. I need to actually go watch this again. I kind of lazily watch this. And just like this video where I'm rambling a lot. There we go. Let's close this up. Sorry, you can't really see anything that I'm doing. Let me go back over here. So this is going to be the third link. Well, I might as well make that the Tanzu Tuesdays on Backstage in Tanzu application platform. Hey, there's Tiffany. Let me pause that. So let's go over here. And put this up here. Okay, so there's your first link. I like to give a little 3 links if you're bored and don't want to get back to work. So the first one is, I'm going to do this eventually too, but you should go check out this interview that we did with Chris Applegate about how we're using the Tanzu, that was funny, how we're using Backstage in the Tanzu application platform, which I think will be quite enjoyable now to read, now that I know that. You can kind of, yeah, that will actually be very good to look at. So I'll check that out. Now, the other thing, I kind of mentioned this. So I've been working, the U.S. Army, we've been working with them, kind of helping out with one of the things they're doing, kind of modernizing how the Army does software. And down in Austin, they've got a software factory there. And I'm kind of working on doing some interviews with some people there about how they've been doing their work. And there's a great presentation. I mean, if you're really interested, as I am, in how people are improving how they do their software and kind of the applications that they work on and things like that, you should really check out this presentation. And I'll highlight one thing from it. But they gave a presentation back. It looks like it's a conference, I don't know, for military stuff. I don't really know what the conference is, but it's a good presentation from what their approach to modernizing how they're doing software, and they're doing it in a very, if you look at it, you'll see it's a very like agile, even Tanzu or Pivotal Labs way of doing things. They have balanced teams and product teams and things like that. But you get an overview of some of the applications that they're working on and how the strategy all the way from the top has kind of gone down to the actual tactics and ways that they're doing teams. But there's one thing in particular, kind of in the Kubernetes world that there's not much detail. It's something I want to talk with them more about. But they go over how they built what they call the sorcerer platform on top of Kubernetes. And the point here, and I don't have the details on it, it'd be interesting to know how it actually works. But the point is that in the U.S. Army, right, usually it takes from idea to running something in production takes about 2 years. And a lot of that time is spent basically certifying it and getting the authorization to operate, the ATO. And you can see, I'm sure in just that certification takes a long time, but they have applied a lot of the automated governance and security measures and stuff like that. And because they built a platform on top of Kubernetes and automated a ton of it, you can see that they reduced that down to just 3 or 6 months to kind of get that certification. And it means they can deploy stuff to production much faster. And I like this visual a lot because it kind of shows the typical process to get code out the door. And it shows over here all the things that usually you have to go through to worry about. And then it's kind of implied, and I'm pretty sure this is what it means, that they have automated doing all of that stuff, which not only makes it faster, but makes it a lot more reliable, I would say. And instead, application developers only have to kind of worry about 26% of one of these little slices of the burger here, which is great. But overall, if you're interested in stories of transformation in an especially large organization that has a lot of things that need to be modernized, I would check out the talk that's here. I'll put a link to that here in the chat window and down below. But it's worth looking at. And, it's one of those things where, like, if the Army can figure it out, you can figure it out, right? And then finally, I need to dig into this some more, but there is, I was looking through this, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation went to SlashData and had them kind of take a slice, I think, out of their developer survey. And there's basically the summary here is like, it's more confirmation that people use everything. They're using all the developers. Each respondent is using multiple clouds, not each, but you can tell that people are using multiple clouds and integrating them together. And there's something, there's a focus on like edge computing, and kind of showing, where is it? Kubernetes awareness, 2 stages. Yeah. So like, here's one example of like, so there's a focus on like, what's the deal with edge in Kubernetes? And like, they're trying to say something really interesting here, but it gets really confusing to me, at least, because the way they define edge, where did I write that? So here's, I don't know, it starts to get weird. So a lot of like, when they talk about edge, like it includes a lot of public cloud usage, which I guess if you have something running at the edge, you might have a public cloud in the middle or not. Like I always thought edge was the opposite of public cloud, but they start to talk about edge in relation to public cloud usage, which is weird. But so I should just email the authors and ask them about it. But I think it's it's always good to look through surveys, and this one is relatively brief. And I think it's discussion of vendors that are used or service providers, and Kubernetes versus just container usage. There's some good data in there that I think is fun to look at. And I think if there's any point to take away from it that I think is very solid, it's that the larger your organization, the more likely you are to be using Kubernetes, and I would assume the more benefit that you're going to get from it. And a lot of it, as we saw someone mentioned in that Spotify video, is due to standardizing. The more and more people you have, the more and more standardization that you need, the more automation you need to make things efficient, rather than having everyone reinvent the wheel and do things on their own, and then conflicting and having to learn about each other. So it makes sense that if you're in a large organization, you could see a lot of value in building your stack on top of Kubernetes. Well, I'll put links to all of those 3 links and everything else in the show notes down below, or if you were watching this live, you can see it in the chat. And I'll be back on Thursday to come up with something to talk about. But as always, if you want to get the archives, you can go to tanzutalk.com. You can see the podcasts that we do, interviews and things like that, but you can click on that videos link. And it's very easy to just look up the playlist of all the episodes that we have, start to peruse the backgrounds there. You can just listen in, see what's going on. Could also learn something. Or or whatever. And with that, thanks for watching in, and we'll see everyone hopefully next time. So, bye-bye.